Hey guys, welcome to the 7 Seconds to Less podcast. My name is Canyon Browning. I'm your host. I'll be joined during this episode by my co-host, David Haker. We're going to break down everything from NBA injury news, the implications on the different teams in our league, as well as top fantasy contributors, and an in-depth analysis of the 5 best rookies in the NBA thus far this year. We've had a great time filming all this stuff. It's been a ton of work. I don't think any of us anticipated how much time it would take to do this, but we've learned a lot and we've had a lot of fun. I hope it's entertaining. I hope it's informative, and look forward to the next episode where we'll break each team down in detail and give you our thoughts on where the league is headed as a whole. Thanks for listening. Please give me any feedback you have, and I hope this is something really cool that we can enjoy for a couple of years to come. Thanks, and enjoy the episode. Josh is busy off gallivanting, doing whatever it is that Josh does. He's going to join us for the second half of the show. But I think we'll just start at the top of the show with Dave and I. We're going to cover kind of 4 segments. We're going to start with injuries. We'll then go into kind of big personnel moves. Being quite honest, we're going to spend most of the time talking about Kyrie and Ben Simmons. Then in the third section, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the top performers, standouts from a fantasy perspective, people that have surprised us, people that maybe came out of nowhere, or people that we're expecting to have big breakout years. And then lastly, we're going to focus in on rookies. Obviously, those of you that know me know I have a very high opinion of this year's rookie class. Probably won't talk about all of them, but we'll hit those rookies a little bit. So I guess to top out the show, Dave, Jamal Murray, obviously, I think the biggest impact you have there is, he's on Jonathan's team. Obviously, Jonathan's in we talk about this a little later in the show, but Jonathan, we have him in kind of that rebuilding phase. Are you holding on to Jamal and waiting for him to come back, or are you selling him now while he's injured and in the hopes that he is, it's changing the progression of his career?
I would look to I'd probably still hold on Jamal Murray if I were Jonathan, because his team, we kind of had him down in like a rebuilding mode. And Murray's still young enough where, he's got probably another solid decade left where he's going to be a top 50, maybe even higher player, if he maintains his health once he gets back. And he's like in a good position in Denver right now where he's going to be able to feed off Jokic basically for the rest of his career, so long as they keep both of them.
Jokic is one of those.
His value isn't that high right now either because he's injured. If he was on a team that was competing for the championship this year, then maybe you look to offload Murray if you get a decent offer.
So the other guy I want to ask about 2 more guys. One is John Wall. So, at this point, John Wall is basically perpetually injured. I think I saw a graphic the other day on a game. I think this is actually before the trade to Houston, but he had sat out, I think, something like 218 straight games at some point, or maybe it was 218 straight days or something. It was some ridiculous length of period of time as compared to any other player that is still an active NBA player. Is there any hope for him to come back and be the player he was before, or are you just hoping he's a 35 point per night guy at this point?
I think you'd be really lucky to get more than that out of him. I think you'd have to fall in the perfect situation. I don't even know where that would be. He'd have to fall somewhere where his usage rate is going to be really high, which basically means the team doesn't know what they're doing because they're investing in an older player. So maybe New Orleans is perfect.
Yeah, David Griffin doesn't know what he's doing. So like he's proven that repeatedly. So John Wall is perfect for that team. Maybe they'll just swap him. Zion for John Wall, perfect trade, good to go.
Yeah. I mean, I think he definitely has the ability and chance to come back and be a good role player on your team, but I wouldn't expect him to be a top 4 or 5 player on your team.
Yeah. I'm pretty in alignment with that. I think I wouldn't write him off as done. I don't think his career is done. I think the danger you have with John Wall is he was a speed player. He's a De'Aaron Fox. He's a point guard in the mold of De'Aaron Fox, right? So he speed kills, blow past the guy. He was never a great shooter. He doesn't have, he has great handles, but handles don't score buckets, to be totally honest. So I like him. I would probably hold on to him if I'm Kara and just hope that you get 35 plus out of him. And like I said, you're really at this point praying that he goes to a team where, their point guard sucks, basically. That's really what you're hoping for.
Yeah, I'd probably wait till he's on a high, and then I'd probably try and sell him. That's me personally. But I think there's a good chance he comes back. Maybe more like a stronger Derrick Rose, because that's another guy that got injured repeatedly and was 100% reliant on speed. But I think John Wall's a little bit better of a shooter, and I think he's a little bit better of a offense setup guy. So I think you can expect more stats out of him than someone like Rose. And I think right now Rose is rosterable. So,
well, we touched on a little bit. I think it's probably a natural transition point to like the thing that I think we'd be remiss not talking about. So the Kyrie situation.
I thought you were going to say Jakob Poeltl. He has COVID and he's impacting my team.
Yeah, we're definitely that's the thing on everyone's mind is Jakob Poeltl.
Same.
No, I think so. What is your take on that? And I don't want to get political. I don't want to talk about his decision to not get vaccinated.
Let's talk about whether or not you should get vaccinated. Let's do it. That's sure to be
a hot message for everybody. But I think obviously, so for background for anybody who's listening who doesn't know kind of the situation. So the state of New York has issued basically I don't know if it's a law or a mandate. I don't know what it is, but essentially statewide mandate from the governor's office that basically says, if you're employed or you're going to participate in employment in the state of New York, you got to be vaccinated. Well, most people don't think of it this way, but Kyrie is an employee of the Nets, and as a result requires that he must be vaccinated to play at home games. So obviously the big decision that they needed to make, and ultimately the Sean Marks needed to make, was, are we going to keep a guy and let him play half the games? Are we going to, and maybe more importantly,
assuming they change the mandate halfway through, or assuming he gets vaccinated halfway through.
Well, in theory, I think the half a game argument was, he could play away games. He could be on the team and play, the other states that don't have these mandates. I think that ultimately, and this was in Sean Marks's statement when he finally came out with it, was I think they look for whatever decision or position you hold on vaccinations. I think from a purely basketball standpoint, I really, really respect and agree with Sean Marks's decision, which was we don't need the media circus associated with Kyrie being on the team while he's making this decision. So it's Kyrie's decision. He's an adult. He can decide what he wants to do. There's a mandate in place. And while he can't play home games, he's not going to participate in team activities, which I think is the best way from a basketball perspective to say, here's the dudes who we're trying to win a championship with. And we don't need a question for KD every night, a question for James Harden every night. When Kyrie going to get vaccinated? That's just not helpful to anyone on the team. It certainly doesn't fit Kevin Durant's personality. He does not enjoy the media, right? He has a very Kareem Abdul-Jabbar approach to the media. So I just think that from a basketball perspective, I get where he's coming from, whether you agree with Kyrie's decision or not. I think it distracts from the mission of trying to win a championship. What do you think?
Yeah, I think also another big basketball reason there is every other game you got to try and rebuild your chemistry with the team that you have. And building chemistry is not an easy thing. I mean, especially when you have 3 superstar high usage players. Like, they're already, even if Kyrie was playing every single game, they'd already have chemistry issues that they need to work through. And it would probably take them most of the season to work through that. A lot like Miami was back in the day with LeBron and Wade and Bosh. So to cut Kyrie out every other game, you're never going to build that chemistry. And then once you get to the playoffs, if the Band-Aid's still in place and Kyrie's still not vaccinated, then you got to play 2 games with Kyrie, 2 games without Kyrie, a game with, a game without, a game with. There's just no way. There's no way that would work.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Like the coaching burden created there. Like, I mean, Steve Nash. I think
well, that's okay, because remember, Kyrie said they don't need a coach. So
that's fair. That's fair. You don't need a 2-time MVP as your coach. That's not. You have Kyrie. Like,
yeah, it'll be fine.
So obviously, for those people don't know, the Pelicans showed up to media day with news that never happens in today's media landscape. Showed up at media day, and basically said, "Hey, by the way, Zion broke his foot in the offseason. It's no big deal. He'll definitely be there for the start of the season." And then I think we heard 5 days later that he has a Jones fracture, which I'm not a doctor, so I don't know exactly what that is.
Kevin Durant had that, and I think he was out a whole year back when he was on OKC.
Yeah, I know. Bill Simmons
and Kevin Durant's about 100 pounds lighter.
Yeah, Bill Simmons covered it on his podcast, and I'll quote, "It's pretty nasty injury. Like, in terms of fractures, like that's one of the fractures you don't want." We know. I guess the best way for me to frame the question to you is, so when we now have a guy who's 21 years old, who has had 3 major injuries in the last 4 years of his career, going back to Duke.
What are the other 2? Remember, he had a shoulder thing.
He had a shoulder thing, and then he tore out. I think he tore his ACL or his knee at Duke, and that's why he didn't play the first season.
I thought you were counting he broke a thumb somewhere in there.
So what do we think about this? I mean, obviously Zion is impactful for both the Pelicans and for Dustin's team. We talk about a little bit later. In my opinion, he's the kind of linchpin of Dustin's team. I think he's got many other great players, but you really need that one superstar. And I if I'm Dustin, I'm hoping Zion is that superstar. What do you think? What's the impact there, fantasy wise, basketball wise?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously if Zion is healthy and he's playing like he did last year, or even better than he did last year, he's like a top 10, 15 guy, right? All he does is score points on high percentages or high field goal percentages and get a lot of rebounds and maybe get some other defensive or assists or whatever. Never going to get threes and going to suck at free throws, but that doesn't matter in our league. So, I mean, if he's healthy and he's playing, he's absolutely like a first round pick in our league. But, like you said, he's been injured more often than not now. So it's, I don't know. It's one of those situations where, do you want to deal with this for the rest of your dynasty league management career? Or do you want to cut loose early, try and get some other decent assets that probably aren't going to stack up to what Zion will be if he's healthy? I don't know what I do, honestly. I have no idea. It reminds me of like the debate.
I know you don't play much fantasy football, but it reminds me very much of kind of the debate of like when you have that guy who's right on the cusp of like being a good performer, like he has really boom or bust guy on a fantasy football team. There's a lot of people who basically say like, I just don't want him because I don't want to deal with the stress every week of deciding whether he's going to be a boom or a bust. Like it's kind of that, it feels like kind of that situation with Zion where it's like, obviously I don't want to taint the waters or be called out for obfuscation. I will officially put this on the record. I'm a huge Zion fan and have had multiple conversations with Dustin about potentially trading for him. But if I'm being objective about the situation, I think that if he does trade him, that will be the reason. So we're not going to cover what happened in the playoffs last year. I think everybody's intimately familiar with the failures out in Philadelphia and what happened and the fallout from that. I think what I'd love to hear from you on is, given where we're at, Ben Simmons holding out on Philadelphia, he's with the team again, but not playing games. Where do you think that leads? Do you think he plays in Philadelphia this year, or is he getting traded? Like, what does it mean for us as a fantasy league? I don't know. I'm interested to hear your opinions there.
Yeah. So Ben Simmons, first of all, nobody other than Ben Simmons knows what's actually going on. So this is all just guesswork. But I think the most recent report is that he's actively refusing the Sixers medical staff mental health discussions. Like, they want to put him through some mental health program, I suppose, whatever that means.
So for those of you who haven't followed the Ben Simmons saga, essentially where this came from was, so Ben had an $8 million payment that was due at the beginning of this year. And in order to get that payment, he needed to report to the team. It's part of the contract and the collective bargaining agreement of the NBA. And so, he said at first, fine, I don't need the money. Well, he very quickly changed his mind on that after about 2 games of losing $360-something thousand a game. He reported to the team, and there's another clause in the CBA that basically says a team doesn't have to pay a player if they're refusing to play instead of being injured. So because Ben Simmons is essentially refusing to play, Philadelphia invoked that clause. And now Ben Simmons' counter to that has basically to say, I'm not physically injured. I'm mentally injured by my relationship with the team. And that's what's keeping me out of games, not my refusal.
Basically, and now the Sixers are offering their medical staff to assist with those mental issues, and he's refusing.
Ben wants out. Daryl Morey doesn't want anything less than a James Harden level player for Ben Simmons. And he's not going to accept trades for, the things that have been on the table. The trades that have been reported thus far, I think, are, Portland.
There was a trade with Golden State. That was a long time ago.
Yeah. Golden State offered
their Wiseman, 2 first-round draft picks this year.
Yeah, Wiseman, both picks that turned out to be Kuminga and Moody this year. And then I think some other picks as well.
Maybe one other
I think they offered Damian Lee, also something like that. And then Portland offered CJ McCollum and some package of players and picks, but basically centered around CJ McCollum. So Daryl's basically, it's at this point, the general consensus around, sports media is Daryl's holding out for Damian Lillard or Bradley Beal, right? Those are the 2 guys that are tier A, tier S level players.
And potentially will become available.
Yeah. And who fit with Joel Embiid, right? I mean, obviously, in theory, Karl-Anthony Towns. Yeah, you need a guard who's a shooter who can complement Joel Embiid. So, I will say Daryl Morey has proven himself to be a harsh negotiator, and I don't see him giving in anytime soon. So at this point, it's just basically a battle of the wills.
He's traded two of the most untradeable contracts in the last 3 years, right? Or 4 years. He traded Chris Paul, and he traded Russell Westbrook.
Yep.
Like, he was the guy, the GM who got John Wall for Westbrook, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think the reality is Daryl Morey has the full support of Philadelphia. They've made that super clear.
And Simmons still has, I think, 3 years left on his contract. So what's the rush?
Yeah.
Unless Joel Embiid comes to him and says, the fact that you're not trading Ben Simmons is pissing me off and making me want to leave. If that happens, then Ben Simmons is gone the next day.
Yep.
But until that happens, I don't understand why Morey would trade Ben Simmons for anything less than a king's ransom.
I think I want to talk a little bit about guys that it's early in the season. I think one thing one thing for those of you, especially in the audience, who haven't played a lot of fantasy basketball or haven't been in our league for very long, the first 3 weeks of the season are a ripe time for talent. This is when you identify guys that are taking new roles, guys that have taken big steps. It's the first time you get to see guys who have put a whole offseason of work in, and you get to see who actually put work in and who just went on cruises the whole offseason. It's also where you see which guys have blossomed into their role and are playing more minutes. I strongly encourage everybody in the audience. Minutes played is the best indicator of fantasy performance that exists on the planet Earth. The more minutes you're on the floor, the more opportunities you have to shoot the ball.
Especially in a points league, which is what we are.
100%. If you're getting, the more time you're out there, the more chance you have to accidentally catch rebounds, accidentally get steals, even if you're not good at those things, right? So I guess I want to ask you, David, and it's a bit of a loaded question because I think I know what the answer is, but like, who are maybe let's start with who's the one guy that you feel like has taken a huge step forward this year that nobody knows about?
I think probably a lot of people don't realize is either the number 2 or the number 4 player. I'll have to look it up, but a top 5 player so far this season in points leagues has been Miles Bridges, who is a 4th-year player on the Hornets. He's basically been a guy that's been like a late round draft pick for the last 3 seasons, and even a mid to late round draft pick at the start of this season for fantasy leagues, just because he has a lot of potential. He's a very athletic guy. He's a bigger guy. He's like kind of like a mix between a wing and a power forward. So he plays power forward for him, but he's been suddenly he's now a 3-point savant, and he's blocking shots everywhere. He's stealing shots. He's their go-to offensive guy. He's benefiting from LaMelo Ball maturing a little bit and stepping up and assuming a greater role as well and taking some pressure off of him, along with Gordon Hayward's finally consistently healthy, and he's able to take some of the load off as well. So now, he has guys around him to space the floor for him, and to allow him play more one-on-one, or to allow him to make cuts and they can make a pass to him for him to finish.
He does not look like a fluke to me. The guy can ball. His shot is, I don't want to say dramatically improved from last season, but the results are dramatically improved. And he's taking a lot more with confidence in the offense. Very much reminds me of Julius Randle. Like that 4 role. I hate to call it a stretch
with a better shot.
With a better shot. Well, I don't know.
And more athletic.
He is certainly more athletic. I think if you knew about Miles Bridges last season, it was because you watched highlights of him dunking on dudes.
Yeah. He's all over the top 10s.
He's all over top 10s last season. But he's very much like he's not exactly built like LeBron, but he isn't that far off. He's a big dude. He's strong. He can jump out the building. And yeah, dude, he's shooting insanely well. To the point David is making, right now in our league, he is, according to total fantasy points, so not fantasy points per game, he's the 3rd best player, right behind Jokic and Giannis, right? Ahead of Durant, ahead of Anthony Davis, ahead of Paul George. So
he's the 11th per game.
Dejounte Murray has been incredible.
He's the new Russell Westbrook, dude.
He has been a triple-double threat every night of the year. His game, I mean, I think, okay, so full disclosure, both David and I are massive San Antonio Spurs fans. So we love seeing Dejounte. I think both you and I have talked about, I think from year 2, knew Dejounte was going to be an all-star. I'll be honest, I did not think he was going to be this good. He is playing outside his mind. He's a huge defender. He's probably the best defender on our team. He is rebounding. His shot.
I mean, he's been the best defender he's been an all-NBA defensive player for a couple years now.
Yeah. And I think that anybody who is a basketball, like a hoop head, right, knows Dejounte brings defense. He's long, he's lanky, he's going to get rebounds. I think, at least from my perspective, where he stepped it up this season has his shooting. there's a lot less wasted energy. Like when he was first in the NBA, it was kind of this like cocked off to the side, little like above the head little thing.
Lonzo Ball shot.
Yeah, it was very Lonzo Ball. But
now
he's
working on his Steph Curry.
He's a lot quicker through his movement, and it frankly just goes in a lot more. And you can see the confidence in his game as I watch him. Because of the debacle that is regional sports networks right now, I actually can't watch Spurs games because
time to get a VPN, dude.
YouTube TV doesn't allow me to watch Bally Sports. But when I have illegally pirated the games, he's a delight to watch.
Don't post this on YouTube.
He's an impressive young player. Al Horford, who we all know what happened with him last year, went to OKC, sat out. They tried to find him a home that worked.
Had a good season though.
He did have a good end of the season. So he is having a Renaissance-esque year thus far. So he's averaging 43 fantasy points per game. I guess my biggest question is like, is this really going to continue? I mean, it's Al Horford.
Here's my prediction. Looking at every season he's ever played. Okay. I'll read off his career averages for you in the categories that are maybe slight outliers so far this year. He has a career average of 1.2 blocks. And this season so far, he's averaging 3 blocks, which I'm pretty sure would make him the best blocker in the NBA. He's also averaging 10.1 rebounds. His career average is 8.2. In the last 7 seasons, he's been right around 7. So expect that to drop off a little bit. His minutes are basically exactly the same as the last 6-7 years. So if he keeps that up and stays healthy, then once those other stats kind of fall back to earth, I think it's more likely he'll be about the 60th ranked player or so.
Yeah.
By the time the season ends, his minutes are pretty much the same as they've always been, which could maybe be a little deceiving. But if you do look a little deeper, like he's shooting 89% from the free throw line. And he's a career 75% shooter. For a while, he shot in the 60s. There's just no way he does that for a whole season.
I do believe that Al Horford's going to have a good year. I think any team that is looking for a guy who's going to perform at a high level, get you 35 points per game for maybe the next 2 years, I think he's a good option. Does he fit on John's team? No, not at all. I think Jonathan should be looking to shop him right now because, quite frankly, he's wasted on Jonathan's team. He's not. You don't need 35 points per game from a 35-year-old dude. So get some young assets, move him to a team that makes sense, and get your value out of him while someone else can use that value, and don't let these last Renaissance years be. I guess the next guy I wanted to talk about, and then I'll kind of pass the ball a little bit on any guys that stuck out for you. Jonas Valanciunas, really playing very well in New Orleans. I've watched, so I have a personal interest in watching New Orleans right now because of a player on my team. I want to see how he's progressed in year 3. Or I think, is it year 2? I don't remember. Nikhil, year 3. I want to see whether he's making that step. And man, Valanciunas looks good. He looked really good last year on Memphis. I said it all last year, who's a guy, anytime people would ask me, who's a guy that's underrated, is always Jonas Valanciunas. I guess the question is, how much does Zion coming back hurt his stock fantasy wise?
I don't know. I don't know if he'll hurt him much at all. Zion will attract a double team, him and Ingram, when they're there. And Valanciunas is probably going to be a benefit or benefit from those defenders being preoccupied. And then he's just a guy that you can just throw him the ball and he'll, more likely than not, he'll just get you a bucket in the post.
Yep.
And I mean, he's always been a rebounding guy, even when he's been around other guys. Jamal Morant has made a lot of improvements this year, although I don't know if he stays where he's at right now. He's the 9th best player. And that's because I think he's shooting ridiculous percentages.
So I have a bit of a take. Have you watched much of Ja? Yeah,
I watched one game.
So I'm Memphis is a league pass team for me right now. John Morant is the most athletic 6'2" guy I've ever seen in my life. Like I'm not old enough to have watched AI when he first came into the league, but I imagine that
AI was not doing crazy dunks over people.
All I know is, I said this I was watching a game with Colin the other night. He legitimately looks like Giannis at 6'2". Like he plays like Giannis with these crazy body control things that like I just don't see people do. Like I'm not used to watching someone just like go into the air and then decide what they're going to do.
Adjust 5 times.
Yeah, like oh no, that didn't work. Let's try a different one. Like I don't know if anybody likes watching Giannis. Like pick up the remote and watch Ja, because that kid is a freak.
Yeah, I just don't know if he'll keep up the fantasy crushing though. Like I agree. Like he seems destined to be a top 5 point guard at some point throughout his career, but he's shooting 52% from the field, which is by far his career high. And he's averaging 2 steals a game, which he's only been a 1 steal guy before. Probably not going to keep up. Everything else seems reasonable though. So DeMar DeRozan is much higher than I expected him to be. I thought he'd kind of drop off a cliff when he joined the Bulls this offseason. He got traded, for everyone who doesn't know, he got traded to the Chicago Bulls, who now have Lonzo Ball. They got him in the offseason. They have Zach LaVine. Now they have DeMar DeRozan, and they also have Nick Vucevic. So obviously, all 4 of those guys are high usage players. There's only 1 basketball, so someone's got to drop off. I thought it would be DeMar DeRozan and somewhat Lonzo Ball, but he's been killing it so far. He's the highest ranked out of all those guys, I think. If you're a Spurs fan, the one thing you know about DeMar DeRozan is he cannot hit a 3 to save his life. So the fact that he's hitting them now is a total fluke, and that's not going to keep up. But I mean, everything else
is infuriating, depending on what perspective you're. Yeah, like or you just get irate that like he suddenly decided to get on this new trend of 3-point shooting 1 year after he's on our team.
Yeah, everything else though looks pretty legit. So I wouldn't be surprised if he finishes top 20. LaMelo Ball took a huge step. He's a 2nd-year player on Tony's team, and so far he's been killing it. He's averaging almost 20 points a game, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, 2 steals, with some 3 threes a game on great percentages other than his field goal percentage, but 94 from the line. I don't know if that's maintainable. 40% from 3 on 7 attempts. That's kind of crazy. But he's playing great.
I think one of the reasons LaMelo's seen such an expansion in terms of his fantasy production is, I mean, to be quite honest, it's just, so again, this is probably a good education piece for the people in the audience that are somewhat new to fantasy. You will see rapid expansion in fantasy contribution in the first 4 years of guys' careers, even if they're not very good. Like rookies, if you get a rookie who gets 20, 25 fantasy points per game in a normal year, this year is an absurd aberration with regard to rookies. But generally, if you get a rookie that's getting 20 to 25 fantasy points per game in the rookie season, like that's a good guy. That's a guy that's going to be a good contributor who might top out around like mid 30s, high 30s, maybe even low 40s. John Morant was low 30s his rookie year, and he was rookie of the year. So, for LaMelo to come in and average 30 something fantasy points a game, you should expect a large jump in year 2. And if you don't see it, that's a huge red flag. Right. That's one of the reasons why there's been so much criticism of Ben Simmons, is because you didn't see these huge jumps in years 2, 3, and 4. Right. Like Miles Bridges, as much as we've talked about it during this pod, like guys like that happen every couple of years, like dudes who make significant steps in year 3 and 4. The norm is a guy is who he's going to be by year 4. And so really what you're looking for in terms of in terms of talent is you want rookies that have gone under the radar. You want to identify guys who are efficient with the time they're given. guys who can put up stats even when they're given less minutes. And in year two and three, you're looking for guys who has the biggest delta in terms of their performance year 1 to year 2 to year 3. So I think, what you look at with LaMelo doesn't shock me, right? I mean, he was a solid performer year 1. He's taken the step forward that I'd expect. He's a really talented kid.
OG Anunoby, I know everyone's always talked about him. Next year is his breakout year. And
he was the Jay Cutler of the NBA.
But maybe this is the year where he's actually breaking out. I don't know. Jared Allen is higher, a lot higher than I expect. Cole Anthony, which, I mean, I hadn't even heard of the guy until I picked him up late last season off the waiver wire.
In the spirit of this episode, I want to keep going with guys that have stood out, guys that are high performers, but we're going to specifically zone in on rookies. We're going to do this in every episode where we'll talk a little bit about performance, whether it be overperforming, underperforming. And then at the end of the performance section, we're going to talk a little bit about rookies because given that this is a dynasty league, obviously rookies are the lifeblood of the NBA, and that's what's going to keep our teams afloat over the next few years. I'm convinced that this last year's draft class is an all-timer. I've compared it to the 2003 draft class, which had LeBron, Carmelo, Chris Paul, Dwayne Wade. I mean, just keep listing. There's like 10 Hall of Famers in that class. The 96 draft class, which had Kobe, Allen Iverson, Ray Allen, right? These things happen every 10 years. There's just like a class that has like tons of talent that kind of just like populate the NBA for years to come. I'm convinced this year is one of those years, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the guys who are standing out and why the data supports that assertion.
If we were not a dynasty league, if we were a 1-year fantasy points or categories league, whatever, there have so far been 5 rookies that are worthy or good enough to be on a team. That's Chris Duarte, Josh Giddey, Franz Wagner, Evan Mobley, and Scottie Barnes. Of course, Scottie Barnes and Evan Mobley were pretty high draft picks in the real NBA draft. So I guess I can't say I'm as surprised by them. Having said that, I'm surprised by Mobley in that he's as good as he is, and he actually seems good from an NBA perspective as well, not just a fantasy perspective. Scottie Barnes, I'm more surprised by. I thought this guy would be, total crap in his rookie year, and maybe he turns into something in like year 3 or 4. But so far he's been the best per game fantasy guy. But out of all these guys, the guy that I'd never even heard of, and is the most surprising, is probably this Chris Duarte guy. He's averaging 27 fantasy points a game, which is the 5th best among rookies. But there's a big jump between him and the 6th best. He's playing on Indiana, and he's averaging 17 points a game, not fantasy points, like real NBA points. He's averaging 17 points a game with 5 rebounds, 2 assists, a steal. He's hitting almost 3 threes a game. So this guy's been probably the most out of nowhere impressive to me.
One of the oldest rookies, so he's 24 years old. So there's some disadvantage there. So I think the theory was he'd be the most ready to contribute. But for those of you who are not draft heads, and I've kind of turned into a draft head the last couple of years, I'm going to translate what ESPN means when they say ready to contribute. They mean bad. The answer is bad. The answer is won't be a good NBA player usually. Like Jabari.
It means they've already hit their ceiling.
It means they've hit the ceiling of who they can be as an NBA, as a player, and they can't get any better. So I was not high on Chris Duarte. I'll be honest, and I'll plug your guy for you so it doesn't come off as tampering. Honestly, Franz Wagner was my kind of like shocker. I watched a ton of draft footage for this last draft. My team being in the absolute dredges of the league last season. And a lot of my strategy was to I was familiar with how good this class was supposed to be. And so it was really important that I watch a lot of films so that I could select the right guys with the picks I would get. And honestly, Franz Wagner did not stick out to me on tape. Like, he was not impressive. He wasn't super athletic. He looked to me like a Duncan Robinson type kind of player, to be totally honest. A bigger than Duncan Robinson, but a Duncan Robinson nonetheless, which is not what I want from a fantasy, certainly not from a first round pick.
Not from a points league.
The guy has been playing really well. Like, he's contributing meaningfully. I will also say, as you go through his stats, and this is one thing just as an education piece for the league, one thing to really take a look at, especially in the first few weeks of the season, is what is the actual games breakdown look like versus what their averages look like. Because you'll have guys in the first 2 weeks of the league who are like, oh, this guy's averaging 25, 35 points a game. But it's because they dropped 50 2 nights and it's just, soaring their average. Which,
single digits the other nights.
yeah. And you go, like, if you see a guy who's got 50 and then 1, 7, 17, 20, and he's in the 30s, like that guy's not averaging the 30s for the season. So Franz has really impressed me. I mean, yes, he has 150-point game, which is certainly buoying his average a little bit, but I mean, 30, 33, 35, 32, he's playing 30 minutes a game. He's on a garbage tier team in Orlando, and he's going to continue to get run. And he passes the eye test when I watch him. Like, kid can ball, man. He's much more athletic than I gave him credit for, much better shooter than I gave him credit for, much better defender than I gave him credit for. So I think he's for real. I honestly
Y'all heard it here. Trade target.
So now David will be accepting any trades that anyone wants to submit.
Absolutely.
And I think a lot of people expected Mobley to be good. I certainly did. That's why I drafted him. I don't think anybody expected him to be as good as he's been. He's literally the defensive anchor for the Cleveland Cavaliers as a 19-year-old kid. Like, he's the best defender on a team, on an NBA
he's 20
team.
Now.
Oh, sorry. He's 20 now.
It's already an old man.
He is the best defender on an NBA team that is winning games. Like, and I'm not saying that just because he's my guy. Like, if you watch him, the kid is a crazy good defender. And Giddey, he's very much in the vein of a LaMelo, like crafty, creative passer, very big, very long. Doesn't play a lick of defense, but hey, man, like, to be honest, especially
it's 1.3 steals and 0.6 blocks, which is, I guess, good for a point guard for blocks, but that's probably because he's big.
Yeah. But I think Giddey's for real. Is he going to be a Hall of Famer? Who knows, right? We gotta watch for that. But I think he's for real. And
so far, his stats point a little bit towards like a Ricky Rubio type. Like, he's not taking many shots. He's not producing many points. In fact, he's producing less points than pretty much all the other top performing rookies by a decent amount. But he's getting a lot of rebounds and assists. Yeah. Because of his size and because of how he plays. He's just based off his stats, he seems like a offense initiator setup player.
The genuine appeal of Giddey as a fantasy asset is he's putting up 30 fantasy points per game right now while scoring it's some absurdly low amount of points.
9
points a game. Like, what happens when that kid learns to shoot?
One thing to note, he's on Oklahoma City, which means they have nobody on their team. So, of course, their number one draft pick is going to be given the opportunity to produce, and he is. But, keep an eye out if OKC starts picking up more players. Maybe his numbers don't progress in the way that you hope. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's not worth holding on to and seeing how he pans out, but he is on the worst team in the NBA with all the minutes in the world. So just keep that in perspective. Yeah. And actually, as we've been sitting here and I'm looking at these guys, maybe the guy I am most impressed with is Scottie Barnes, because all these other 4 players have clear opportunity there. And like, these teams aren't any good. Cleveland's garbage. Orlando's garbage. OKC's garbage. Indiana's, they might as well be garbage. Maybe they're not quite as bad as the other ones, but whatever. Scottie Barnes.
I'd like to officially plug that I don't think Cleveland is garbage, but I just wanted to get that on film so that when they end the season at 500, that I can say I said so.
Okay. We'll do an over under on that.
Yeah.
Scottie Barnes, though, he's on Toronto, which have established players. Granted, some of them are injured right now. Siakam's injured, but they already have Anunoby, who we talked about earlier in the overperforming segment. He's breaking out, so he's demanding a lot of minutes. They have Fred VanVleet, who's a top 10, 15 guy. They have all these established players that were there, post Kawhi championship time, with all of their roles already defined. And he comes in as just like Toronto lucked into their draft pick, basically. I think last year they 100%. Were statistically, they were projected to get like the 10th or 11th or 12th pick in the draft, but they somehow ended up with the 4th pick. And they grabbed Scottie Barnes. And so he's coming onto a team that doesn't have as much opportunity as all these other ones and doesn't have a clear role for him. But in spite of all that, he's averaging the most fantasy points of any player.
If I'm trying to lean into Masai's vision, so Masai's the general manager for Toronto.
He has a 7'3" wingspan.
He does.
That's, for everyone that doesn't know, that is freakish.
That's what we call a positive ape index.
Like Draymond Green. If you ever watch Golden State games, you always notice that Draymond Green is kind of a short guy, and they always talk about how sometimes he plays small ball center. The reason he can do that is because he has like a 7'5" wingspan. So he's shorter than everyone, but he can still reach up to the rim and block everyone.
Yeah.
Or steal the ball. And that's kind of what this guy, I guess, has with his wingspan as well.
Every time you're drafting a guy, you're drafting a guy with a hole, and you hope that he can fill that hole through either hard work or training or whatever it is. It's almost just as likely to bank on a guy growing 2 inches from 20 to 25 years old than it is to bank on him learning to shoot an NBA level. And Scottie Barnes, this is essentially what happened with Giannis. If anybody's familiar with his career trajectory, I think he was 6'7" and 3/4" or something when he came into the league.
Like that when he got drafted.
Grew 3 inches, and all of a sudden he's the most dominant. At least. He's the most dominant point forward.
Put on 100 pounds of muscle, must be taking every steroid under the sun.
Yeah. No, David, there's no steroids in the NBA.
Nothing to see here.
There's no steroids in the NBA. What are you talking about?
This is all natural.
But yeah, I mean, I think to assume that it's that much more preposterous for a 20-year-old to grow, who's built the way these guys are built, and to gain 2 inches of height, put on some muscle, and then to add a little bit of other things to his toolbox. Honestly, yeah, Scottie, I think that Toronto hit a home run, and I think that
6'8" inches tall, 7'3" wingspan, 39.5" vertical leap.
Yeah,
he's a freak athlete.
And you can see, and I think again, the question was, could he do it? And I think the answer is there. Like we've just talked about, he's the best performing rookie. Now, personally, I hope Mobley wins Rookie of the Year, but I mean, there's a real chance Scottie Barnes wins that. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of all these guys, and I think maybe the best way to wrap up this rookie conversation is don't allow the stats you're seeing rookies putting up this year to set a baseline for you that's unfair or unreasonable, because this year is an aberration for sure for people that follow these things regularly. Now, I think what comes along with that is like, and I'm just going to put this out there, we're not going to talk about them today, but there is value down the lineup a little more in guys that are putting up numbers that are good for a normal year and performing on teams that are not on rosters right now, that are rookies. And I think a lot of the reason for that is because, the perception is like, oh, if he's not contributing right now, I can't use him, which it's not necessarily the case.
And just to harp on your point, Canyon, the best fantasy player right now is Nikola Jokic. His rookie year, he averaged 25.6 fantasy points. That's not that good. Giannis is the number 2 player. His rookie year, he averaged 17 fantasy points. That's garbage. Paul George, his rookie year, 16.8 points. Garbage. Jimmy Butler, rookie year, 4.8 points. Garbage. Like, not even rosterable. He was so bad.
Yeah. Well, and I
that's
think
the story for a lot of these players.
I think that is generally the story. Like, most good rookies are putting up, I'm going to say 15 to 25 fantasy points per game. If they're hitting that their first year. Now, I think you can also learn things from that, right? A guy that's putting up 15, generally not going to be a 50-point guy during his career. Like, there's some correlations there. Not true. We just heard, right, some examples of guys that don't fall into that, but there are some data points you can use to predict where a guy is headed. You got to think about the slope of where these guys' career trajectories are headed. And then I think maybe the last point I'll make, and that is that don't be disappointed by guys that aren't putting up numbers. Like rookies on good teams put up crap numbers.